is known as Earthrise. It was taken from the Apollo 8 spacecraft on Christmas Eve in 1968, and it's the first colour photo ever taken of Earth from space. And so this picture marks a small but significant turning point in human history. And that's the moment that we were first able to actually see that the Earth isn't just this vast geological object under our feet, but instead it is a living, breathing system that's undeniably beautiful and arrestingly fragile. Today, we take this image of Earth from a distance for granted, but we're only just beginning to understand quite how fragile this island of life really is. We're understanding that now because we are in an emergency. Just since the shutter clicked on this photo, we've pumped more than 3 times as much carbon pollution into our atmosphere as we did in the entirety of human history that's gone before. At the same time as doing that, we've wiped out huge swathes of forests and other natural habitats which otherwise would have helped soak up that carbon. And the result is that we have heated this planet by around 1 degree. All of us have seen the evidence of that hotter, more chaotic climate. In just the last few months, we've seen the hottest day on record in the UK. We've seen the hottest June on record worldwide. We've seen devastation caused by unusually slow, strong tropical storms. We've seen disrupted rainfall patterns causing catastrophic flooding and extreme water shortages in different parts of the world. We've seen drier, warmer, stormier conditions contributing to extreme fire conditions in Australia, Indonesia, even much of the Arctic. These are the things that scientists were warning us about when I, and probably many of us, were learning about climate breakdown at school. And now I haven't even turned 30, and I'm standing here and talking to you about how they're part of our normality. And so if this is the normality we've created to date, what does our future hold? Of course, the answer to that question depends on what we choose to do. We might hope that what we choose to do is to keep all of the promises we've made around the world to tackle climate breakdown. Surely, if we do that, the extra warming that we face is limited, because surely those pledges should keep us close to 1.5 degrees of warming, which is the threshold that science tells us we must not cross if we want to avoid much more dangerous changes in our climate. As it turns out, if we do keep all of those promises, we're likely to see around 3 degrees of warming by the end of this century. A 3-degree world is a world where climate breakdown almost certainly will exact an unprecedented human cost. And this is a human cost which mostly won't be borne by you and me. It'll be borne by the most vulnerable communities and the most vulnerable people around the world. This situation is a global crisis. It's not something we can avoid by recycling a bit more or turning some lights out. It's a situation which requires leadership and ambition and transformative, equitable change. But the scale of that change that we need doesn't mean that as individuals there's nothing that we can do. We're not powerless, we can act. But what do we do? When I was younger, my answer to that question was that I would try and become a climate change scientist. And that was essentially because I spent a lot of time watching nature documentaries, and it was from the scientists on those documentaries that I really began to understand the scale of the climate crisis and to see that this was really something that threatened so much that I cared about. And so I thought, I'll go out and I'll do research and I'll help everyone understand the scale of this problem, because then surely people will act. And so I went to university and I studied climate change ecology, and I spent the next few years doing research in the Arctic. The Arctic, as a region, is warming faster than almost anywhere on Earth. The consequences of this are already so significant that the Arctic has been described as dead habitat walking. And so, of course, everything that I saw in the Arctic, everything I heard from local people and from other scientists, every single new piece of research that I read, left me feeling more and more alarmed by the scale and the speed of the changes we were seeing. But despite that very tangible sense of urgency, which is felt across the entire scientific community, it felt like all any of us could do was keep shouting a warning from behind soundproof glass. Whatever we were saying, however many times we said it, no one seemed to be hearing us. But all of us know that that is not the case, because the science on climate breakdown has been loud and clear for decades. Our politicians, business leaders, fossil fuel companies have heard that warning over and over again. Our problem is that they've chosen to ignore it. And that's the reason that today, in asking you to act, I'm asking you to rebel. By rebellion, I don't mean anarchy. I don't mean revolution. I mean peacefully and compassionately standing up and saying, this is enough. And this approach of peaceful, respectful resistance is the one taken by Extinction Rebellion. Extinction Rebellion is a civil protest organisation resisting the disruption of our climate and the destruction of biodiversity. The group has 3 core demands: to tell the truth about the climate and the ecological emergency, to act now, aiming for net zero emissions by 2025, it's just 6 years away, and finally, to go beyond politics, using a citizens' assembly to guide decisions around climate and biodiversity policy. I first came across Extinction Rebellion last November, less than a month after the group formed. At the time, I was writing up a piece of research about impacts of extreme events linked to climate breakdown in the Arctic. And although I was really passionate about that work, the knowledge that I was just another voice adding to that same message of urgency that's already been ignored for so long was leaving me more and more frustrated and confused and increasingly angry. And so when I saw videos of Extinction Rebellion activists blocking traffic, blocking bridges in central London, it made me stop and think. Because I'd never done any activism before. And so this idea of rebellion sounded a bit extreme. But I couldn't help but recognize that what I was seeing was completely rational. These were ordinary people, parents, pensioners, teachers, doctors, sitting calmly in the road and refusing to move. And they weren't doing this to cause disruption for the sake of disruption or to try and punish people just trying to go about their everyday lives. They were doing it because they also felt afraid or outraged or grief-stricken. They were doing it because they understood that we can't afford to be ignored any longer. But can this ever work? Can a few people sitting in the road actually have any impact? Well, yes. Civil disobedience is an incredibly powerful driver of social change, and our history is full of people whose decisions to disobey have shaped the world we live in. From the people of Sheffield and Manchester who began the Right to Roam movement with the mass trespass of Kinder Scout, through, of course, to people like Rosa Parks, whose historic refusal to give up her seat to a white man played such a pivotal role in the American civil rights movement. And on top of this clear potency of civil disobedience, I kept finding myself coming back to the same question. What is the alternative? What else is left for us to do? I don't have an answer to that question. And so in April, I joined a wonderful group of Oxford rebels travelling to London for the first international rebellion. For nearly 2 weeks, thousands of people closed 5 key areas of London to traffic. There was a pink boat emblazoned with "Tell the Truth" parked in Oxford Circus. Cars and birdsong, tents and birdsong replaced cars at Marble Arch. Waterloo Bridge became the long-awaited Garden Bridge. And over 1,000 peaceful rebels were arrested. And of course, the rebellion did have an impact. Since April, everyone from local councils to UK Parliament has declared a climate emergency. But without action, those declarations ring hollow. Until we see that action, giving up just isn't an option. What that means is that every autumn and every spring, until our demands are met, rebels from all over Oxford and from all over the country will be back on the streets of London. We will still be calling on the government to tell the truth and act as if the truth is real. We will still be committed to act with peace and respect and thoughtfulness. And we will still be doing everything that we can, with everyone who can, for as long as we can. We said at the beginning of this talk that what happens next depends on what we choose to do. And so I do have to ask you, will you choose to act? Because if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? Thank you.